All right, I'm gonna have to do this pretty quick before I get asked to leave. But I wanted to show you some of the agricultural equipment, just how big it is and how heavy this stuff is. Now I'm gonna show you some of the discs. Now I talked about these fields that are being disc plowed, and I wanted to show you what that looks like. So here we have just the sort of typical run-of-the-mill plowing attachment disc. So here it is. Now you see the size of the iron and steel in this object, and they're huge. Okay. So if you take a look behind me, that's what all this stuff is. These are all disking machines. Now I'm gonna hop back in the truck here. So we'll just show you how it works. This goes on the back of the tractor here, and the tractor tows this entire thing. And I have no idea how long that thing is. Probably 30. Yeah, it's probably 30 feet long, and I bet it plows at least 30 feet wide. And so, as you might expect, it takes one heck of a tractor to tow something like that when it's literally plowing through the ground. So I'm going to show you what kind of stuff we're talking about. Tractors like this are a thing of the past practically. Those are small time tractors. You would think that's a pretty good sized tractor. Nope, that's a tractor. That's a tractor. So take a look at the sheer size of this machine. I literally can't even touch the headlights on this thing. Look at the size of this machine. Now, these giant wide tracks actually do help with the soil compaction. That's why they make them. And because when you're doing work in the winter, because of the hard pans, then they can get stuck. And believe it or not, when a vehicle this size gets stuck, it's practically impossible to get out. So that's why this is done. But look at this. This is the size of stuff you used to see on steam trains. These are huge machines. Look at the size of this stuff. I like that thing back there. That looks like a harvester back there. So these machines are absolutely massive. Long gone is the day of the small tractor. All the machines that you see here are part of a greater revolution in agriculture called the Green Revolution. Tractors, the very first tractors, like the Hart and Parr steam tractors, became available to farmers, affordable to farmers and available to farmers in the 40s, early 40s, mid 40s. And so by the 50s, people were done with mules and horses, right? Now, also in the mid 40s, there was a plant geneticist that introduced custom crops, high yield, what we would call factory crops, right? That geneticist started with dwarf wheat, which made the plant responded better to fertilizer. And so because you weren't growing as large of a plant, a tall of a plant, then more of the fertilizer, you could have more plants total, and the plants would grow faster and go to seed faster. Now, there has been lots of types of plants developed for high yield agriculture, or factory farming, or whatever you want to call it. Modern agriculture, high yield farming, high yield agriculture, whatever. There's loads of buzzwords for it. But most of the plants are created for a couple of different things. To grow closer together, to be able to withstand more and more and more fertilizers, to be resistant to certain herbicides, so that they can plant like Roundup Ready soybeans, for instance, which are essentially immune to glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. And once you got those out there, then all you got to do is spray Roundup all over everything, and it will kill everything but the Roundup Ready soybeans. And so it's a way to deal with weeds. there's obviously a problem with that. These organisms are all called GMOs, okay? So the advent of the tractor and the advent of the GMO hit the agricultural world at about the same time, and that's really what sparked what's called the Green Revolution. Now, without GMOs and tractors, we could not have fed the 7+ billion people that are on this planet presently. However, as you have seen in this series of videos, there's a drawback to tractors. It's a colossal machine, and the farmer has to buy it, and that starts the cycle of debt. Those machines are $250,000 plus, okay? So the typical farmer has to buy all that stuff on credit. Then they have to use the GMOs, and they have to use subsidized crops like corn that are paid for by the government to make sure that they're actually going to be able to make the payments for the taxes and all the machines that they had to buy. And it's this never-ending cycle, right? Not to mention the carbon footprint on those machines is huge. You see that something that big is going to take a whole lot of diesel to run. Furthermore, because food is grown out in these rural areas like I'm driving around in right now, and this is outside of Bonham, Texas, then everywhere that food goes, it has to go on the back of a train or a big rig. And that's where we get into the concept of food miles. And that increases the carbon footprint of everything you eat or drink, right? Because it has to be transported. That's all diesel. That's all diesel fuel. So there's a lot of things to this green revolution. There's so much there. There's the never-ending cycle of fertilizers. There's the never-ending cycle of corporate ownership of GMOs and contracting with farmers that they can only use GMOs. There's lawsuits against farmers who didn't even want the GMOs, but the pollen from GMO plants spread onto their farm, and then people got sued for it and all this other stuff. Not to mention the fact that a lot of these things are built, are engineered to be used with pesticides and herbicides. So there's this never-ending treadmill of herbicides where you're just constantly dumping more and more herbicide on there. And furthermore, because they're all grown so close together, then there's lots of pests. And so now there's this never-ending cycle of pesticide where I put a ton of pesticide out there with my giant tractor and sprayer, and then some of the insects don't die, and those reproduce, and now the next year I need even more pesticide or even more toxic a pesticide to try to kill the pests. And then once again, some of them are resistant to it, and then it just ratchets up more and more and more. It's called the pesticide treadmill. And so the Green Revolution, sort of the dark side of it, is this never-ending dependency on agrochemicals, right? Agrochemical being the pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. That just never seems to end. And because there are very few young people, there are very few farmers in general. Like I said to you earlier in one of the other videos, more than 80% of the U.S. population lives in major metropolitan areas, these urban areas, not in rural areas. So very, very few people are farmers anyway. And the vast majority of farmers are over the age of 50. The vast majority are even older than that. They're over the age of 60. So there are few young people. There are few young people willing to make a change. Few young people that are informed about satellite technologies, drones, autonomous robots, that sort of thing, that could increase efficiency, could decrease how much we use these petrochemicals I should say agrochemicals, things like that. Changes could be made, but we need young people, and we need more people educated in agriculture in order to help the system of agriculture make these changes. I am not in the scene of a Wild West movie. This is the platform of an abandoned train station, a railway station that you see right here. And so think, why would there be a train station here, right? Tracks right there, old train depot right here. If you'd ever wonder why there would be a train depot right here, the answer is the Green Revolution. Okay? So after the before the Green Revolution in the 20s and 30s and everywhere prior to that, farming looked like this. Family farms, multiple generations working on the farm, kids working out there, mom and dad working out there, lots of different crops. They had all sorts of stuff. They'd have different seasons. They'd have half a dozen different crops, everything from melons and gourds and vegetables and fruits. They'd have chickens and a couple of milk cows and things like this, and maybe some goats and sheep and things like that. All sorts of this huge diversity on this small little family farm. Well, after the Green Revolution, after the advent of the tractor and the advent of GMOs, then the whole thing got blown up to factory levels, right? To mass production. Like you see behind me, these are grain elevators. These are grain silos, they're called. And they're for storing absolutely colossal production of grain, and that's why this old train depot is here, and why this train track is run through here, is to ship all that stuff out to these major metropolitan areas, the cities. And because the Green Revolution happened, then that allowed people, we didn't need everybody working on a farm, we didn't need everybody having a garden growing their own food in the back like my grandparents did, okay? It allowed us all to move to the city and go to colleges and go to high school and do all these other things because someone else was growing our food and shipping it to us with big rigs and trains and all these other things. So, like I said, everything's connected. Everything has a pros and a con. Not everything is just bad or just good. There's good and bad to all sort of things. Now, one of the things that has been good, like I said, is that it allowed urbanization. It allowed us to have more education and things like that, because you didn't have to work on the farm quite as much. But what it led to, this upscaling, this factorization or industrialization of agriculture, has led us to this deal where, and there's the reason I chose a grain elevator to do this, is because it has led to an extremely homogenized diet and an extremely homogenized business of agriculture. Right now, globally, over 70% of what's grown is grain, right? And it's a very small number of things. It's rice, corn, sorghum, and wheat. Okay, that's most of what's grown around the world. And the farms are these giant monocultures. Monoculture meaning that only one crop is grown. And because the bigger and bigger and bigger tractors, bigger and bigger and bigger sprayers, stronger and stronger and stronger agrochemicals, leads to these massive factory farm operations where it's corn as far as you can see for miles in every direction, or wheat as far as you can see in every direction. Corn that also has almost no nutritional value, that is not the same corn that your ancestors ate, because now it's some sort of industrialized GMO product that's used for making high fructose corn syrup and Twinkies and crap like that. Stuff like that. Anyway, a brain fart. Well, I gotta edit this out. Monocultures are the opposite of diversity. They're the opposite of efficiency in the case that, well, they're the opposite of diversity. When you go into a monoculture, there's absolutely nothing living there. There are no insects because of all the pesticide. There are no other plants because of all the herbicide. And it's just miles and miles and miles of one thing. And they, a lot of times these farms consolidate and become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's no fence rows, there's no little house places, there's no little wood lots or anything else. Of course, we got to clear those down so we don't have to keep turning the giant tractor around. The thing's giant, the thing's massive, half size of a train engine. So it's easier to just delete everything else in the world and then just plow it all through and make it all one single crop. That generates an absolutely colossal amount of certain crops, certain grains. Now you might ask yourself, why do we need that much? We don't. A lot of it even just gets thrown away. A lot of it gets exported somewhere else. A lot of it just becomes filler in all sorts of other packaged and processed foods. or it becomes feedstock for things like cattle and chickens that shouldn't be eating that much grain in the first place.